Çelikel. We actually became friends after a long conversation on rock music, as far as I remember, after one of the ODTÜ conferences. And we discovered that we haunted the same bars and rock bars and things like that, and listened to similar music. So I'll just give a little bit of an introduction. Professor Mehmet Çelikel graduated from Hacettepe University Department of English Linguistics in 1993. He completed his MA in English Language and Literature at the University of Hertfordshire in England in 1997. He got his PhD with a thesis entitled The Post-Colonial Condition, the Fiction of Rushdie, Qureshi, and Roy at Liverpool University in England in 2001. He has published 2 academic books in Turkish, Sömürgecilik Sonrası İngiliz Romanında Kültür ve Kimlik, this, and it has no signature inside, so I don't know. Soon to be amended, I hope. In 2011, and Çağdaş İngiliz Yazınında Küreselleşme, Göç ve Kültür, Globalization, Migration and Culture in Contemporary British Fiction. He currently works as a professor at the Department of English Language and Literature at Pamukkale University. Okay, the floor is yours, Mehmet Ali Hocam.
Could you please turn on your microphone? Could I do it?
There should be a box popping up to say the host has asked you to unmute. No?
Should I unmute all? No. Could I do that? Could you do it now, Hocam? No.
Oh, yes.
Yes, okay.
Thank you.
Sorry.
So, first of all, I want to thank Dr. Berkem Gürenci Sağlam and Professor Dr. Özlem Uzundemir and all my colleagues at Çankaya University for inviting me and giving me this opportunity. I'm honored and feel very happy to be giving this talk. It's a great pleasure for me. This is a topic I've been studying for 5 years, and I have presented similar seminars elsewhere a few times. And each time I add new things to this presentation. This is not going to be the analysis of literary references in rock, but only a survey. Because individual analysis of each song require a very long session. So instead, I would like to present you as many songs as possible in a limited time. Let me remind you that I'm an old-fashioned traditional rocker who got stuck in the period between 1970s and 1990s of rock music. So there may be missing parts, and I may have missed so many other bands and songs with references to literature. So I apologize for that now. So let's have fun together. So my title is Rock and Lit, and I have divided my presentation into 6 sections: literature in rock music, bands inspired by literature, rock in literature, fictional rock bands, writers as rock stars, and poet musicians. Rock music has been in full swing since the beginning of 1950s. Having been said to be a derivation of blues music that had already been popular since the beginning of the 20th century, rock and roll has been musically based on blues chords and rhythms, playing them in a faster and harder manner. It is, of course, a relevant question to ask why the music of grief, like blues, that also gave birth to jazz, one of the most highly artistic music genres today, evolved into rock and roll that sounds like the music of entertainment and dancing in 1950s, as in the example of Elvis Presley. Let me talk about a little bit of history here. Before the Second World War, there were no examples of rock and roll, but after the Second World War, the teenagers and young adults in 1950s who had lived their childhood during the Second World War was a generation who looked for a new world order. They looked for peace. The war was over, but they had lost their childhood in the war. This generation was called the Beat generation. The name is derived from offbeat. They wanted to live outside the beat, outside the rhythm of the older generations and their boring traditions, old-fashioned lifestyle, and conservative ideologies. Offbeat became the new beat. In the United States, Elvis Presley came out with his music called rock and roll, played in unusually fast rhythms for the young people with long hair. Well, the long hair was a type of hair that only covered the ears then. His lyrics were not concerned with the grief of blues music or any kind of social problems, although it was unusually rebellious against the conservatism of the society. His enormous popularity led to the birth of a young generation that wanted to go out into the streets instead of sitting with their parents at home in the nights, and formed gangs as presented in the films like Rebel Without a Cause in 1955, featuring the renowned rebel figure acted by James Dean, and The West Side Story in 1961, with strong references to Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet. On the other side of the Atlantic, in the United Kingdom, the bands called the Beatles, direct reference to the Beat generation, and the Rolling Stones appeared towards the end of 1950s. The members of the Beatles came from Liverpool's working class areas. The reference of their name to their generation indicated their rebellion. The Rolling Stones adapted their name from a blues song called Rolling Stone by Muddy Waters. By doing so, they not only referred to the roots of rock and roll music and blues, but also referred to the lifestyle of the Beats, rolling, rather than having a regular walk in life. The name of the band is undoubtedly a representation of the music genre that they were performing, which is rock and roll, a reference to blues and a reference to offbeat style. These early rock and roll bands invited the youth to rebellion by dancing, shouting, having long hair, rejecting the values of the older generations, and experiencing love and sex outside the marriage bonds. That was outrageous. With their ear-covering long hair, shoulder-length long hair was unthinkable for men, they elicited criticism, anger, and even hatred from the conservative classes. And in the 1960s, the brothers and sisters of the Beat generation turned into hippie generation, advocating free sex, drugs, traveling without settling anywhere, rejecting regular work, and struggling for peace against warmongers, racists, and capitalists. They preferred pacifism instead of aggression. So the music of Beatles and Rolling Stones evolved into hippie generation's ideological attitude towards life and society, especially with John Lennon, who turned into a more radical leftist, leaving the band and producing his own albums. And in the 1970s, hippie generation disappeared slowly, and an angrier, more aggressive generation was born, punk generation. They were more aggressive because they had witnessed that the pacifism and mild, peaceful activism of the hippies were not sufficient to change the world. Actually, they did not even believe the idea that the world would change. Hence, the philosophy was no future, as in a Sex Pistols song. During the same decade, a new subgenre of rock and roll was born too, hard rock, which was a louder, harder, and faster interpretation of rock. In 1980s saw the birth of heavy metal, which rejected the sound of hard rock, even the sound of hard rock, created songs that were even louder, tougher, and more speedy. The times were changing. The mild, entertaining rock and roll were now divided into subgenres called hard rock, heavy metal, punk, thrash metal, speed metal, death metal, black metal, alternative rock, grunge, glam rock, and other countless types. The question, therefore, is, how could such a rebellious, marginal, outrageous type of music have references to literature? The answer lies in the fact that rock music is rebellious itself, and by its rebellious nature, the culture of rock music is political, seeks to change, revolutionize, question, argue back, respond to the expected and approved forms by the unexpected and disapproved ones. So it is no wonder why the composers of rock music were so much into literary references. Their music required virtuosity of each musician in their instruments, since it's a music that relies on solo partitions in the songs. They wanted to offer the same or at least similar level of virtuosity in lyric writing. Therefore, there are numerous examples of literary references in rock music. So, although this one is not a literary reference, I would like to begin with John Lennon's Working Class Hero, which has a lyrical quality in the poetic sense. Lennon was an activist for human rights, working class, peace, and became famous for his radical forms of protests with his wife Yoko Ono, like stripping naked together in public spaces to protest the American military intrusion in Vietnam. So I find it quite relevant to quote Lennon's Working Class Hero here to indicate the radical attitude of rock music. Let's listen to a little bit of this song.
As soon as you're born, they make you feel small by giving you no time instead of it all, till the pain is so big you feel nothing at all. A working class hero is something to be. A working class hero is something to be.
Okay, then, first of all, the literature in rock began to appear in a Rolling Stones song, Sympathy for the Devil, released in 1968. The song was inspired by Mikhail Bulgakov's novel, The Master and Margarita. Rolling Stones, founded and led by Mick Jagger, were also a radical band in their outrageous rebellion attitude, but they were less political than Lennon. And coming to 1969, Led Zeppelin, in my opinion, one of the greatest hard rock bands, were very much under the influence of J.R.R. Tolkien's The Lord of the Rings, as in most of the 1960s generation. In their album in 1969 called Led Zeppelin II, Ramble On was a reference to Lord of the Rings by Tolkien. Okay, and another interesting example is from 1971, again from Led Zeppelin, Misty Mountain Hub in their fourth album in 1971 is a reference to the image of misty mountains in The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien. The lyrics of the song refer to Robert Plant's search for a better society and individual freedom. And there are symbolical references to individual freedom and a better society by J.R.R. Tolkien in The Hobbit. And Battle of Evermore, again by Led Zeppelin in their third album, produced in 1971, is another reference to The Lord of the Rings by Tolkien. Coming to 1970s now, Alan Parsons' project released an album called Tales of Mystery and Imagination, Edgar Allan Poe. So the title of the book and the writer's name appear to be the title of the music album itself. The songs in the album are the retellings of the horror stories and poems, and Raven is the most popular one of those songs. So I don't want to make you listen to all of the songs that I mentioned here to save time. And Pink Floyd, probably one of the most influential bands in rock history, produced an album called Animals in 1977, alluding to George Orwell's Animal Farm. The song Sheep in the album refers to the great masses of people under the authoritarian regimes. So you can hear the sound of the sheep here. And also the mellow pace of the song is a reference to the mellow walking of the sheep, hiding their heads and getting closer to each other and walking in a mass, quietly. And always in compliance with the authority without changing the rhythm and without changing the sound pattern, that's all. So, typical Pink Floyd. Okay, in 1980, the Irish rock band U2 produced an album, and in that album they released a song called Shadows and Tall Trees, which is a reference to William Golding's Lord of the Flies. And the song recounts how the boys are brainwashed in an institutionalized state education system. And in William Golding's novel, the trees and shadows of them are a symbolical reference to that authoritarian education system in the state institutions. And now, coming to 1984, the year 1984, perhaps the most famous thrash metal band, Metallica, released their album Ride the Lightning. And in that album, they wrote a song called For Whom the Bell Tolls, a direct reference to Hemingway's novel entitled For Whom the Bell Tolls. And the song depicts the scene of death of 5 soldiers in an airstrike during the Spanish Civil War. And in the beginning of the song, the sound of the bells are the sound of the death bells. And afterwards, the airstrike begins. Now the song begins here. That's the airstrike. Right. And in the next slide, I have the rhyme of the Ancient Mariner, of course. Samuel Taylor Coleridge's long narrative poem, The Rhyme of the Ancient Mariner, was in Iron Maiden's album in 1984, Power Slave. In Power Slave, they included this song, and probably the most famous adaptation of English poetry to heavy metal music. The song's changing rhythm throughout reflects the storm, wind, and huge waves described by Coleridge in his poem, because the rhythm is changing all the way through the song, and the sound of the guitars changing all the way through the song, referring to the sea storm. And let's listen to a bit of this song. Okay, so in 1987, Gordon Sumner, also known as Sting, the ex-guitarist of the rock and reggae band The Police, left the band later on to carry on his successful solo career and produced many politically inspired albums and stood as a spokesperson for many disadvantaged communities in the world. In 1987, he produced an album called Nothing Like the Sun, which is an open allusion to Shakespeare's Sonnet 130. My mistress's eyes are nothing like the sun. And the punk band Ramones released a song called Pet Sematary in 1981 for their album Brain Drain, being a reference to the novel Pet Sematary by Stephen King. The song was used as a soundtrack to the film Pet Sematary, based on the same novel. Iron Maiden never stopped producing albums with direct references to literature. Their album entitled Brave New World, produced in the year 2000, and its title song is based on Aldous Huxley's Brave New World. And next, in Radiohead's Hail to the Thief album, produced in 2003, the song entitled 2 + 2 = 5 is a direct reference to George Orwell's 1984, when O'Brien tortures Winston Smith. He wants Winston to accept this equation. And I think the rhythm behind is like gradual ticking on the head in a torture scene to make the prisoner accept all the alternative truths that the state wants them to believe. Okay, in 2011, Annabelle Lee by ex-Fleetwood Mac member Stevie Nicks, produced in 2011, is a direct composition of Edgar Allan Poe's poem Annabelle Lee. The song is included in the album titled as In Your Dreams. Now, having come to mythology in rock. In 1980s, particularly the heavy metal bands performed spectacle stage performances. And in those shows, they wore costumes recalling armors of primitive warriors in the ancient times with their black leather armbands, chains, axes, and helmets. By this recollection of warriors in antiquity, they based the lyrics of their songs on mythological tales. One of the most famous examples is again from Iron Maiden's Flight of Icarus in their Peace of Mind album released in 1983. So the wind when they are flying, and the storm begins, of course.
An old man stands on the hill as the crowd warms to the first breeze of light. A bird's song shatters the steel. His eyes are ablaze. See the madman in his gaze. Fly on your way like an eagle. Fly as high as the sun on your way.
Okay, and the next one is Man of War. I think the album cover is not a very successful one. It is full of kish, but Man of War produced a song called Achilles, Agony and Ecstasy in 8 parts in 1992 in their album called The Triumph of Steel. And the story is based on the Iliad and Odyssey by Homer, and it depicts the fight between Hector and Achilles. All drums, performance are created. Now the rhythm will change suddenly. And now fight. The musical depiction of fight. Now, let me move on to the references to Turkish literature in Turkish rock bands. But rock music in Turkey mostly began in the form of Anatolian rock. Because the first rock musicians in Turkey relied on the culture of Anatolian folk music, and they composed their songs in accordance with the rhythms of the Anatolian folk music. And sometimes they adapted the traditional folk songs to rock music. So Cem Karaca was one of the founding members of the Anatolian rock music, and most of the Anatolian rock musicians were very much interested in composing Turkish poets. And instead of making references to literature, they directly composed poems. This one is, for example, from Orhan Veli Kanık, Bedava. The sound of the song, the melody of the song is quite Anatolian, but then there is still the sound of the bass and the drums in the background.
Bedava yaşıyoruz, dostlar bedava, hava bedava, bulut bedava, dere tepe bedava, yağmur çamur bedava, bedava yaşıyoruz, dostlar bedava.
So the next example is from Nazım Hikmet, Şeyh Bedrettin Destanı, the Epic of Şeyh Bedrettin, composed by Cem Karaca again, which is a long symphonic composition. And this shows his interest in Turkish literature, and also this indicates that his political views comply with the political views of Nazım Hikmet. And a more contemporary rock band called Işığın Yansıması, the reflection of light, they also relied a lot on Turkish poets, and they composed many poems from Turkish literature. And Cahit Külevi's Hikaye is an interesting example.
Senin dudakların pembe, ellerin beyaz. Al, tut ellerimi bebek, tut biraz. Benim doğduğum köylerde ceviz ağaçları yoktu. Ben bu yüzden senin...
So, sorry to interrupt so abruptly, but the next example is again from Işığın Yansıması. They also composed from more modern Turkish poetry, like Lavinia from Özdemir Asaf. And also their first album was called Birdenbire, a direct reference to Orhan Veli Kanık's poem Birdenbire, which is also the title song of the album. And let me move on to the band names inspired by literature. Uriah Heep, the hard rock band formed in London in 1969, adopted Charles Dickens's character Uriah Heep's name. In David Copperfield, Uriah Heep signs his name as Very Humble, and the first album by Uriah Heep is called Very Heavy, Very Humble, without the H in the beginning, very Cockney. And in Turkish rock, again, an alternative rock band called Büyük Ev Ablukada is named after Turgut Uyar's poem called Büyük Ev Ablukada. So far I have talked about literature in rock music, but what about rock in literature? Several authors refer to rock music in their novels. Hanif Kureishi is famous for relating his books to rock music. His second novel, Black Album, is a reference to Prince's Black Album as well as Metallica's Black Album. But some critics argue that the title of this novel is an opposition to White Album by the Beatles. And apart from rock in literature, we have fictional rock bands. There are also examples of fictional rock bands. Salman Rushdie's novel, The Ground Beneath Her Feet, is a novel about a fictional rock band, VTO, reminiscence of U2. The band in the book, it has a hit song that becomes popular all around the world, and the song is called The Ground Beneath Her Feet. And the vocalist, the woman vocalist of the band, in Salman Rushdie's description and depiction of her appearance, she looks very much like Tina Turner. And the song inspired the rock band U2, and they composed it. And another union of rock and literature occurred by the help of this song. U2 invited the author in one of their concerts to the stage in which they sang the song for the first time. And therefore they turned the author into a rock star himself. So that's a picture together with Bono on stage. And this is the song. Okay, now poet musicians. Bob Dylan, American folk blues singer composer, is also known as a very good poet. And he was awarded the Nobel Prize in 2016. And the song I want you to listen with me is Tomorrow Night, my selection, but there may be better ones poetically. But I have selected this song because it is an acoustic song, and the composition of the music reflects the emotions in the song.
Just another song that's in my heart to linger on.
But Bob Dylan is not the only poet musician. We have Leonard Cohen, who is another poet, who started composing his own poems and found himself to be a singer on stage. And next to Leonard Cohen, we have Tom Waits, another poet musician, and he also has poetry books. And this song, Blue Valentines, might be one of the most melancholic songs of all time. So let's listen to that.
Sends me blue Valentine on the way from Philadelphia to mark the anniversary of someone that I used to be. And it feels like a warrior out for my rest. Baby, you got me checking.
Okay, so so far I just wanted to speak about the selection of the songs that I loved and the selection of the songs that I found with references to literature. Thank you for listening to me, and thank you for bearing with me.
Thank you very much, Professor Çelikel. I'm sure there must be questions or comments. I know I have a few if nobody doesn't.
That's what I'm afraid of.
Any questions?
The floor is, yes, open for questions and comments.
It is difficult to be the first, right?
Jeffrey Hocam, don't you have a question? As a poet musician yourself?
Oh, I have so many questions. Where is there the time? I was thinking, you know, when you put up the 1984 reference, that David Bowie had a 1984 song as well from my teenage years. So,
oh, right.
I was thinking of that.
I forgot that one.
And I was thinking when you mentioned Sting, as to where he got his stage name from, which is of course Frodo's dagger is called Sting, and that's where he gets it. No questions?
Any other questions or comments?
Can I have a question, Mehmet Ali Hocam?
Yes, please.
Actually, the field itself is quite, at the same time, an efficient field of study from a scholarly point of view, as you did yourself. And there's certain theoretical work concerning the relationships between music and literature. And they usually tend to, approach to the matter from certain categories, something like they are categorizing the field at something, as far as I remember, something like that: literature in music, music in literature, and literature and music kind of categorizations. And I suppose it's a field of study, scholarly study, developing particularly I don't know, in the last 20 years, or perhaps it may have some roots in the past. Can you advise us any theoretical framework or any theoretical work to read in order to, in a way, improve the depth of our approach?
Well, I don't know if I can advise you what to do, but I can answer this question by pointing out how I started approaching it. Yeah. The first time I started studying this, I looked at the linguistic structure of two languages, linguistic structure of English and the phonetic and linguistic structure of Turkish, and how it influenced the compositions, the way the musicians compose their songs. And what I found was, in Anatolian rock, for instance, Turkish language has an agglutinative structure. So we add suffixes to the end of the words. So then the rhythms, the Western rhythms, are not quite suitable to compose it, because then you have to divide the syllables in between the words. So therefore, it causes sentences, music sentences, like in our national anthem. Yeah. You know, the words are cut at the end of the music sentence and drop in the next line. So perhaps because of that, the first Anatolian rock musicians preferred the Anatolian melodies to do that. And on the other hand, English language is an isolated language. All the units are isolated from one another, so that made it probably more suitable to the compositions in rock music. But then the contemporary rock musicians in Turkey are more successful in doing that. And also, this is the linguistic part of it, but theoretically, I use the cultural theories to analyze the songs separately. In this presentation, I have analysis of each song separately, how each song goes and how each song rises the sound and lowers the sound, or how the rhythm changes in order to refer to the literary text that they refer to. So this is what I can say for the moment. But now I'm planning to study that more comprehensively in the future.
Thank you. As a small contribution, perhaps I can add that, of course, this was not rock, but a piece of classical music. We studied Mallarmé's The Faun and Debussy's The Prelude together with my class. And although we are not experts on music, we just try to read the text and analyze it and hear the music and try to connect these two together. But surprisingly, all of us, including me, were able to, draw certain parallels between the musical patterns and the patterns in the poetical work itself. And actually, the difficulty is that, as I said, we are not experts on music usually, if I can talk on behalf of myself. So you can approach to the literary text and analyze it to a certain extent, but when it comes to music, and you have to stop a while and do something extra work on it, perhaps, in order to discover the relationship. And as a final note, I want to underline, you talked about Cem Karaca, one of my favorites, of course. And his Safinas, as far as I know, is one of the longest, musical pieces written in Turkish and consisting the rock, sound in itself, if I'm not mistaken.
That's right. I think it is one of the only examples of rock opera in Turkish rock music, or in Turkish music in general, probably. And it bears some similarities to Jethro Tull's "Thick as a Brick" in its sound, vocal sound, and the flute used in the song. But it's one of the wonderful things.
Yeah.
So,
thank you.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Welcome.
I think we can take another question. Or a contribution.
It's not, sorry, it's not really a question, but first of all, I'd like to thank you for this presentation. And I just realized that in terms of the relationship between music and literature, it's really similar in the case of, in literature, we talk about rewritings and retellings, and it's the same for music as well. There are lots of covers of one single song. For example, you talked about Working Class Hero by John Lennon, which has many covers, and the recent one I know is by Green Day, which is a pop punk band. And I think it's really interesting that how an ancient text is still valid today in terms of their themes and subjects. The same thing is also happens in music. For example, John Lennon's song "Working Class Hero" is still valid in terms of the working class struggles. So I just want to point it out that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I think the Turkish version of Working Class Hero is Tamirci Çırağı by Cem Karaca.
Anyone else?
Hello, my class, where are you?
Hello, I would like to thank you, Professor Mehmet Çelikel, for this presentation.
Thank you, Mr.
This is not a question, but I want to talk about a Turkish band, which is really related with literature. It's contemporary progressive rock band called Yaya, and their songs are mostly about literature. For example, they have an album O Altın Ülkede, which is direct reference to 1984 by George Orwell. And they have a song in that album, which is called Sonya'ya. The name of the song comes from the story from I can't remember, Ray Bradbury, The Last Pedestrian.
Yeah.
And they lastly released a song in Feridun Düzağaç album, which is called Yabancı, which comes from the Albert Camus Yabancı. Yeah.
So I should find that. Thank you, Mustafa.
You're welcome.
Great contribution. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
It seems as if 1984 and Lord of the Rings references deserve papers by themselves and analyses by themselves. Those two seem to be the most popular texts I'm hearing.
Well, when we're talking about Lord of the Rings inspired music, I think we should at least talk about some Blind Guardian because they have albums and albums of it.
Right. Yeah, I'm too old to remember Blind Guardian.
I'll send you a link, Hocam.
Oh, all right. Thank you.
Thank you very much, all of you who joined us, and thank you very much, Mehmet Ali Hocam. It was a pleasure to listen to you. Before we finish, I'd like to ask you, we have a recording of this talk, and if you give us your permission, we would like to put it on YouTube if other people would like to listen to it. Today, we had a good bunch of people, 90 people listened to you. And many more maybe would like to listen.
It's no problem for me. Please feel free to do so.
Thank you very much. And before we finish, since we cannot, listen to you on stage, we can only thank you. And we will, let me share my screen. We would like to thank you by with a certificate. You now are a father of a turtle in the Mediterranean. In Antalya. In Antalya, since we know that you have connections in Antalya.
Yes.
I think you are going to get the certificate, right?
Yes, you will receive.
This is just an online version.
The real.
I will frame it. The best certificate I have in my life.
Well, thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
And for listening, and thank you, Mehmet Ali Hocam, for this very
Thanks, everybody. Nice to see you all. Thank you.
Yes, definitely. Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you very much.